thinking recently about the physical act of moving, like moving into a new house or apartment maybe a couple decades ago. The sheer physical weight of your life was just staggering.
Oh, it really was. You were literally hauling your entire identity in cardboard boxes.
Right. You had boxes upon boxes of heavy books. You had crates of CDs. You had those giant wobbly towers of DVDs and VHS tapes.
And, massive stereo equipment, heady desktop computers.
Exactly. And you probably had a bulky car parked in the driveway that you had saved up for years to buy outright. Or, well, at least you were slowly paying off the bank to eventually own the title free and clear.
Right. The goal was always absolute possession.
Yeah, you could physically touch the things that defined your status, your entertainment, your work, your whole life, really.
Yeah.
The stuff you own formed this kind of tangible perimeter around your identity. But today
is a completely different reality.
it really is. I mean, you stream this deep dive, your music, your movies. You might be listening to this while driving a leased car, or, maybe you just grabbed a zip car for the afternoon.
Or you're at work, logging into cloud-based software that your company doesn't actually own or even host on their own servers.
Exactly. You can essentially move across the country or even to a totally different continent with just a laptop and a suitcase. And yet, you still have immediate access to millions of songs, thousands of movies, and infinite computing power.
It's a profound shift in how we interact with the material world.
It is. And it brings up a really simple but honestly fundamental question. Are we witnessing the end of ownership?
I mean, it might very well be the defining economic question of our time.
Yeah.
And it feels almost invisible to the average person, right?
Yeah.
Because it happened gradually and then just all at once.
Yeah, we've systematically traded the permanence of possession for the absolute convenience of access. And it's not just happening in media or software anymore. It is reshaping the entire physical world around us.
Which is why we need to unpack this. Because to really understand the trajectory we're on, we have to look under the hood of this new economy.
Right. And that is exactly what our mission is for today's deep dive. We're going to tear this apart. We've got a massive stack of research we're pulling from today.
We have heavy industrial frameworks from BCG, financial data from SAP and Zora, and we're even getting into deep consumer psychology studies.
Yeah, we need to figure out if this is just a clever pricing trend, a new way for companies to extract a few extra bucks a month from our wallets, or if this represents a deep structural transformation of capitalism itself.
Because it fundamentally isn't just about renting instead of buying. It is a complete rewiring of how value is created, how it's delivered to you, the consumer, and crucially, how it's measured by financial markets.
And to you listening, whether you're, managing a massive enterprise transition to the cloud for your company, or you're just staring at your credit card bill this month, wondering why you have 14 different monthly subscription charges for things you thought you already bought, you are deeply embedded in this access economy.
We all are. But to make sense of it, we really need to define our terms first. Because the business world throws around words like renting, leasing, and subscribing as if they all mean the exact same thing.
Which they don't, right? Legally and economically, they're wildly different animals.
Completely distinct concepts. Blurring them is actually a major source of consumer confusion right now. Let's start with the baseline, which is traditional ownership.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork. What does it actually mean to own something?
Historically, and in a strict legal sense, ownership isn't just possessing a physical object. It is acquiring what legal scholars call a bundle of property rights.
A bundle of rights. So it's not just holding the thing in your hand.
Right. When you buy a physical asset, you naturally have the right to use it. But more importantly, you have the right to modify it, to resell it on the secondary market, or to pledge it as collateral for a loan.
You could even just take a sledgehammer to it and destroy it if you really wanted to, right?
Exactly. You hold the ultimate sovereign authority over that asset. And from the perspective of the company that sold it to you, the revenue was a singular, one-time transaction.
They made their margin, they handed over the keys, and the relationship essentially ended there, unless you needed a repair.
Precisely. So ownership is absolute control. It's a permanent transfer of rights.
Okay, so then you have renting and leasing, which obviously aren't new. I mean, people have been renting land and leasing equipment for centuries. How do those fit into this modern framework?
Rental and leasing are essentially ways to transfer the use of an asset without transferring the actual title.
Okay, so I get to use it, but I don't own it on paper.
Right. Rental is temporary, often really informal access. It's typically very short term, and the owner absolutely retains the asset at the end of the contract.
Like getting a hotel room for the weekend.
Yes, or hiring a piece of heavy construction equipment for a 3-day project. The pricing you pay for a rental inherently includes a short-term risk premium. You pay a higher daily rate for the privilege of just walking away when you're done.
Right, the flexibility costs extra. So how is leasing different from that?
Leasing is a bit more structured. It's a medium to long-term contract for exclusive use. You still don't own the car or the commercial office space, but you commit to a rigid schedule of payments over, say, 3 to 5 years.
So it's less about quick convenience and more about financial structuring.
Exactly. It allows both the user and the owner to optimize their financial positions, often for tax purposes or capital allocation. But the critical baseline here is that both renting and leasing are still generally tied to one specific, tangible, physical asset.
Okay, which brings us to the more modern iterations, subscriptions and memberships. This is where things start to detach from physical reality and get much more abstract.
They do. Subscriptions are recurring payments that grant ongoing access, but usually it's access to a service, a capability, or a sprawling catalog rather than one specific physical asset.
Right, like when you subscribe to Netflix or Adobe Creative Cloud, you aren't renting a specific server rack in a data center somewhere.
No, and you aren't renting a specific line of code either. You are buying a continuous stream of access that is constantly changing and updating.
And then memberships take that abstraction even further, don't they?
They do by bundling access with identity, community, or status. Think of a gym membership or Amazon Prime or even loyalty programs for high-end luxury brands.
So you're paying for a sense of belonging and a tier of privileges just as much as you're paying for the underlying service itself.
Exactly. But the most complex evolution of all of this, and this is where the global economy is really shifting, is what the industry calls product as a service, or PaaS.
Sometimes broadened to ZOS, right? Anything as a service. I have to say, this concept honestly blew my mind when we were going through the research.
It's radical. This is where the physical, tangible products we used to buy outright are being entirely swallowed up by service contracts.
So the manufacturer retains ownership of the hardware, the heavy equipment, the actual physical thing.
Right, and they charge the user based purely on the output or the performance of that equipment.
That is just a massive shift. But to truly grasp how a manufacturer could even attempt to pull that off, the sources point to a deeper structural change in how businesses themselves are built today.
Yes. You fundamentally cannot talk about the end of ownership without talking about the massive economic shift from what we call pipeline businesses to platform businesses.
This comes from the research of Parker, Van Alstyne, and Chowdhury, right? It seems absolutely foundational to understanding the access economy.
It is. They outlined how, for basically the entire 20th century, the dominant, almost unquestioned business model was a pipeline.
I found their distinction really fascinating. So a pipeline is a linear, step-by-step value chain.
Exactly. A company designs a product in R&D, they source raw materials, they manufacture it in a factory, and they push it through a distribution channel.
Like a fleet of trucks taking it to a retail store, and then a consumer eventually buys it at the end of the line. Producers are at one end of the pipe, consumers are at the other.
It is entirely linear, and the company creates all the value internally before pushing it out to the market. But a platform operates on a completely different geometry.
Right, a platform is a business based on enabling value-creating interactions between external producers and consumers, like Uber or Airbnb or Amazon Marketplace.
Yes. Let's try to visualize the difference here because it's crucial for understanding the economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. So a traditional pipeline business is literally like a water pipe. The company is sitting at the reservoir, pumping the product through the pipe.
And value degrades as it travels. There's friction, there are middlemen taking a cut.
Yeah, and the consumer is just standing passively at the tap, catching the water. It only flows one way. But a platform isn't a pipe at all.
No, it's more like a town square.
Right. The platform company isn't pumping the water. They were just building the physical infrastructure. They're paving the square, setting up the market stalls, establishing the security and the rules of trade.
Exactly. They do all that so that everyone else can come in and interact. The platform itself doesn't own the cars, the real estate, or the inventory.
But wait, a traditional town square is public property. These digital platforms are privately owned, highly regulated toll roads, essentially.
That is a very important distinction. It's privatized infrastructure where the owner taxes every single interaction that happens inside those walls.
And that's the genius of the model from a capitalist perspective, isn't it?
It is. Platforms invert the firm. The bulk of the value is no longer created inside the company by its own employees. It's created outside the company by its massive community of users.
The firm effectively turns inside out.
Exactly. Its primary focus shifts entirely from manufacturing a perfect product to governing the ecosystem, optimizing the algorithms, and ensuring the network effects keep compounding.
Because in a pipeline, value degrades through friction. But in a platform town square, value actually compounds through network effects.
Right. The more market stalls that open in your square, the more buyers show up. The more buyers that show up, the more lucrative it is for new stalls to open.
And because of the digital technologies enabling these platforms, the lines between what is a product and what is a service are just completely disintegrating.
They are entirely blurring. Think about software.
Oh man, software used to be a very physical product. You drove to a big box electronics store, you bought a literal cardboard box with a CD-ROM inside.
You took it home, you installed it, and it was a product, a static thing you owned.
No, software is a service beamed invisibly to your device. And look at cars. A car used to be a purely mechanical product: gears, pistons, steel.
Now it's effectively a rolling computer. It receives continuous software updates from a server thousands of miles away.
Everything in our lives is becoming this weird hybrid of physical hardware tethered to digital services, which naturally leads us to the mechanics of why this shift is happening at such an aggressive pace.
Right, we've established the taxonomy, we know the what. But why are both massive global corporations and everyday consumers simultaneously agreeing to abandon a model that worked perfectly fine for centuries?
Because if this were just companies being greedy and trying to force a bad deal on us, consumers would eventually rebel, right?
They would. They'd just go to a competitor who sold things the old-fashioned way.
And conversely, if this were just consumers demanding endless freebies and infinite flexibility, the companies would go bankrupt trying to provide it.
Exactly. There has to be a mutual structural alignment of forces pushing both sides toward the access economy.
And looking at the research, there seem to be three massive drivers here. We've got technological enablers, overwhelming financial imperatives, and a profound shift in consumer psychology.
Let's start with the technology because, honestly, none of this happens without the infrastructure.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The technological foundation really rests on the convergence of three things: cloud computing, the Internet of Things, or IoT, and pervasive high-speed mobile networks like 5G.
And historically, the internet was primarily a distribution channel, right?
Right. It was a faster way to send a document, or a way to order a physical book to be mailed to your house. But today, the Internet acts as a global coordination mechanism.
Okay, expand on that. What is the actual difference between distribution and coordination in this context?
Well, distribution is just sending a finished product to a user. Coordination is monitoring and managing that product while the user is actually interacting with it.
Oh, wow. So it's a constant two-way street?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of incredibly cheap sensors and pervasive connectivity, the physical and the digital have fully converged. A manufacturer can now monitor a commercial jet engine mid-flight.
Or an industrial printing press in a factory in Germany.
Or even a smart thermostat in your living room, all in real time. You fundamentally cannot sell something as a service if you cannot measure exactly how much of that service the customer is actually consuming.
That makes total sense. Cloud computing eliminated the need for consumers or businesses to own heavy processing power.
And the Internet of Things allowed companies to keep a permanent digital tether to their physical products out in the real world.
And once that digital tether is established, it just opens the floodgates for the financial imperative. And honestly, looking at the numbers in these reports, the sheer profitability of the access model is staggering.
It almost forces companies to change their entire model.
It really does. Look at Apple. The sources highlight that Apple entered the market in the 1970s purely as a hardware vendor. They sold physical computers.
And they were very successful at it.
But fast forward to 2019, and Apple's services business, so Apple Music, iCloud, the App Store cut, had gross margins of 63.7%.
Which is incredible.
Right. Compare that to their massive product division, selling iPhones and MacBooks, which had gross margins of 32.2%. Their services are almost twice as profitable as their physical hardware.
And the financial imperative isn't just about raw profit margins, it's about the quality of the revenue. This is a critical concept to grasp if we want to understand how Wall Street values companies today.
Okay, the quality of revenue. What does Wall Street actually want?
Investors, above all else, crave predictability. Traditional pipeline businesses rely on lumpy, highly volatile, one-time sales.
Right, if you're a traditional software company or a hardware manufacturer, you have to convince your customer to buy a brand new phone or a brand new license every single year.
You basically start every fiscal quarter at zero. If there's a recession or your new product just isn't a hit, your revenue falls off a cliff.
But if you transition to a subscription model, you don't start the quarter at zero. You start the quarter with millions of people already locked in, paying you automatically.
Exactly. This is the metric that rules modern business. Annual recurring revenue, or ARR.
And there's data to back up how powerful this is, right?
Oh, absolutely. The research firm Zura produces something called the Subscription Economy Index. They tracked thousands of companies over a 12-year period.
And what do they find?
The data is unequivocal. Companies operating on recurring revenue models grew 3.4 times faster than the broader S&P 500 index.
3.4 times faster. That's huge.
It is. Financial markets apply massive valuation premiums to companies with high ARR because the risk profile of the business is dramatically lower.
Okay, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Wall Street loves this predictability and high-quality revenue. But isn't that just a polite corporate way of saying they found a method to bleed us dry slowly over time?
I mean, that is the core tension of the model.
Right, because a $1,000 phone hurts to buy once. But a $40 a month subscription cost me $4,440 over 3 years. Wall Street loves ARR because they're ultimately extracting more total wealth from my pocket.
Right. From the corporate perspective, yes, the lifetime value of a subscribed customer is often significantly higher than a customer who makes a one-time purchase.
So the incentive to switch is massive.
It's overwhelming. If a software company makes $100 million in one-time software sales and another company makes $100 million in recurring subscription revenue, the market will value the subscription company vastly higher.
Like how much higher?
Often 10 to 15 times revenue versus maybe 2 or 3 times for the traditional company. The pressure from the board of directors for CEOs to transition their businesses to access models is just inescapable.
Because if you don't do it, your competitors will, and they'll use their higher stock price to buy you out.
Exactly.
Okay, so the technology makes it possible to track everything, and Wall Street makes it wildly, aggressively profitable to bill for everything monthly. But what about us? What about the consumer?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Because historically, owning things was the defining feature of the American dream. A house with a white picket fence, a car in the driveway, a garage full of power tools. You owned your domain.
But consumer research is showing a massive behavioral shift away from that desire. And to understand why, we have to look beyond economics and bring in sociology.
The sources rely heavily on the late sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, right?
Yes, specifically his brilliant concept of liquid modernity.
Okay, unpack liquid modernity for us.
Bauman argued that in the past, say, the mid-20th century society was solid. Institutions were solid. Jobs were solid. You worked at the same factory or corporation for 40 years and got a gold watch.
Marriages were solid.
Yeah.
And property relations were solid.
You're right. You bought a house, you accumulated physical assets, and you built a very stable, long-term life strategy around permanence. But today, Bauman argues, social structures and economic realities are highly unstable.
They are liquid. They do not hold their shape.
Exactly.
I think anyone listening to this can relate to that feeling of liquidity. Nothing feels permanent anymore. And if you are living a liquid life, solid assets suddenly feel less like a foundation and more like a trap.
They become an anchor in a fast-moving current.
Right. If you know your job might move you to a new city in 6 months, or your entire industry might get disrupted by AI in 3 years, locking yourself into a 30-year mortgage, or buying a rapidly depreciating asset like a car, suddenly feels like a massive unnecessary risk.
Precisely. In a liquid society, consumers adapt by prioritizing the here and now. Consumption becomes heavily present-oriented.
So the experience and the immediate convenience take center stage.
And long-term permanence becomes the least important factor in the purchasing decision. People want flexibility above all else. They want instant gratification, and they want freedom from what researchers call the work of consumption.
The work of consumption, you mean like all the hidden burdens of owning stuff?
Yes. Ownership is heavy. It requires upfront capital. It requires ongoing maintenance.
You have to manage appreciation, fix things when they break, and eventually figure out how to dispose of them or sell them.
Access models provide an escape from all of that. It's almost a psychological coping mechanism to manage the challenges of a highly unpredictable world.
But I have to ask a chicken and egg question here. Are people actively choosing to rent and subscribe because they genuinely want to, as an expression of this liquid freedom? Or are they being quietly forced into it by structural economic constraints?
It's a very fair question.
Because the sources note that this shift to access models coincides heavily with the trend of reurbanization. People have been moving back into dense city centers where living spaces are drastically shrinking.
Space is at an absolute premium.
Right. If you live in a 500 square foot apartment in New York or London, you physically do not have the space to own a massive DVD collection or a garage full of tools.
It is undeniably a combination of both psychological preference and economic constraint. Urban density makes access models highly efficient. Think of car-sharing programs like Zipcar.
They rely on the mathematical probability that lots of people live within a short walking distance of a shared vehicle, right?
Exactly. But you are entirely correct to point out the stark reality of capital constraints. In major metropolitan areas globally, housing costs now consume a massive, unprecedented percentage of household income.
So consumers simply have less discretionary capital available to buy cars, high-end electronics, or luxury goods outright.
So access models step in to bridge that gap. They convert massive, impossible upfront capital costs into smaller, bite-sized monthly operating costs.
It democratizes access to premium goods. You can lease a luxury car or subscribe to a high-end clothing rental service, even if it explicitly denies you the ability to actually build equity in those items.
Exactly. So we have this perfect storm.
The digital infrastructure is ready, the capital markets are aggressively demanding recurring revenue, and consumers are either psychologically primed for flexibility or economically forced into monthly payments.
And when you look at how this perfect storm is reshaping physical industries, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is not just a quirky software trend. Let's look at the cross-sector convergence.
Right, starting with the digital pioneers who really laid the groundwork.
The transition naturally found its footing in software and media. Companies like Microsoft and Adobe are the classic textbook case studies in the research.
Historically, they operated pure pipeline businesses. They sold perpetual one-time software licenses. You bought a CD-ROM of Adobe Photoshop, you installed it on your hard drive, and you owned the right to use that specific version forever.
But both companies made aggressive and, at the time, incredibly controversial pivots to cloud-hosted SaaS models, software as a service.
And we shouldn't gloss over how painful that pivot was. When Adobe announced the shift to the Creative Cloud subscription model, their user base was furious.
There was massive backlash. People petitioned, they threatened to boycott. Consumers naturally wanted to buy the software once and be done with it.
Right, why would I want to pay $50 a month for the rest of my life for a tool I used to buy for a flat $600? From the consumer's perspective, it felt like extortion.
It did, but Adobe understood the existential financial imperative. By forcing the move to Creative Cloud, they accomplished several massive strategic goals simultaneously.
Let's break those down. First, they smoothed out their revenue into predictable ARR, like we talked about.
Second, they ensured every single user was always on the exact same, most recent version of the software.
Which drastically reduced their engineering and customer support costs, right?
Mhm.
Because they no longer had to patch 5 different legacy versions of Photoshop.
Exactly. And third, they virtually eliminated software piracy overnight.
Because you cannot pirate a continuous authenticated cloud connection.
Microsoft followed the exact same playbook with Office 365. And of course, the media industry executed a similar transition, moving from selling physical CDs and DVDs to selling streaming access via Spotify, Netflix, and Disney Plus Degree.
We all live through the software and media transition. It feels normal now. But what is truly remarkable, and honestly a little unsettling, is how this exact same logic, this exact same hunger for recurring revenue is now invading the physical world.
The world of heavy metal manufacturing and hardware.
Yes. This brings us to transportation and the concept of the software-defined vehicle.
This is where the rubber literally meets the road.
So the sources reference a study in the Journal of Consumer Research specifically analyzing Zipcar. They define car sharing as market-mediated access, where a consumer gains temporary use of a vehicle but no transfer of ownership takes place.
But that's just a rental platform. The automators themselves, the companies actually forging the steel, are taking the access model to a completely different level.
Yeah, we found this Wild, highly specific example in the sources regarding BMW. BMW recently experimented with rolling out a monthly subscription service for heated seats.
It was a fascinating and highly polarizing move.
Let's really break down the mechanics of this because it feels dystopian. The physical heating coils, the wiring, the heavy hardware required to heat the seats are all already physically installed in the car at the factory.
They are built into the vehicle you purchased.
You bought the car, it is sitting in your driveway, you are hauling the physical weight of those heating coils around every single day. But to actually turn them on and feel the heat, you have to pay BMW a monthly fee to send a digital signal to unlock them.
It's quite a concept.
My question is, are you subscribing to a digital service, or are you just paying a digital ransom to unlock the physical hardware you already possess?
It is a profound legal and ethical question that perfectly highlights the disruption of the connected vehicle revolution. What BMW was testing is the reality of the software-defined vehicle, or the SDV.
Automakers are fundamentally changing how they view a car, aren't they?
Completely.
Yeah.
They no longer see it as a mechanical object. They see it as a rolling computing platform that can receive over-the-air or OTA updates exactly like your smartphone.
But if I own the physical coils and they disable them via an OTA update because my credit card expired and I missed a $15 payment, who actually owns the car? Am I just driving a corporate asset that I happen to be responsible for storing and washing?
In a practical sense, yes. The OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, want to shift their entire business model. They are envious of Apple and Adobe.
They want that recurring revenue.
Exactly. They want to move away from the low-margin, singular transaction of selling you a car once every 7 years and move toward a high-margin, lifetime relationship of feature subscriptions.
So they want to charge you monthly for autonomous driving capabilities, for battery range extensions, for infotainment packages, and yes, for heated seats.
Whether consumers will ultimately accept paying recurring fees for hardware features already physically present in their vehicles remains a massive point of friction. Consumers viscerally rejected the heated seat subscription, forcing BMW to actually walk it back in some markets.
But strategically, across the entire automotive industry, the software-defined vehicle is seen as the holy grail of future profitability.
It is, and this ambition isn't limited to consumer cars either. It scales up to the biggest, heaviest, most complex industries on Earth.
Right. The research report from BCG Boston Consulting Group outlines something called manufacturing product as a service, and it represents a massive structural rewiring of industrial capitalism.
They lay out a very detailed framework for how you completely remove the burden of ownership from massive industrial companies.
The BCG framework is brilliant because it exposes the incredibly complex financial engineering required to pull this off at scale. If you want to offer a multi-million-dollar industrial printing press or a massive factory robotics system as a service, you can't just slap a monthly fee on it and call it a day.
No, because the manufacturer doesn't want that massive, depreciating physical asset sitting heavily on their own balance sheet, destroying their return on capital.
And the end user definitely doesn't want to take on the debt to buy it outright either.
So BCG outlines 5 key players required to make industrial paths actually function.
Okay, let's walk through the mechanics of this because it sounds like Wall Street magic. How does a company sell the use of a machine without anyone officially owning it in the traditional sense?
First, you have to create a special purpose vehicle, an SPV. This is a standalone, legally isolated entity created exclusively to hold the legal ownership of the physical assets, the machinery itself.
Right, so the SPV acts as a financial shield. If the factory using the machines goes bankrupt, the SPV still owns the machines, so the people who funded them are protected.
Exactly. It isolates the financial risk. Second, you have the third-party investors. These are banks, private equity, institutional capital, who provide the equity and the debt to actually fund that SPV and buy the machines.
Okay, so the money guys. Who's third?
Third, you have the asset producers. These are the traditional manufacturing companies that actually design, forge, and build the equipment. Fourth, you have the operators who manage the day-to-day running of the plant. And finally, fifth, you have the users, the end customers who simply reserve production capacity on a subscription basis.
So under this model, you could be a massive global publishing company selling millions of printed catalogs, but you don't actually own a single printing press. You don't take out loans to buy equipment. You don't hire mechanics to fix them.
Right. You just subscribe to the output of a factory that is legally owned by an SPV, funded by Wall Street bankers, built by an asset producer, and run by a third-party operator.
That is wild. And this isn't science fiction. It is happening right now, isn't it?
It is. Heidelberg, the massive German printing press manufacturer, is transitioning to exactly this model. They offer a subscription where customers do not buy the printing machine. They pay Heidelberg a precise fee for every single printed page the machine produces.
Or look at the aviation sector. Rolls-Royce pioneered what they call the power-by-the-hour model decades ago, and it's basically become the industry standard.
Yes. Airlines do not buy the multi-million-dollar jet engines attached to their planes. They pay Rolls-Royce a dynamic fee for every hour that the engine is actively flying and functioning properly in the air.
You know, it completely flips the script on what you were actually purchasing.
It does. We are moving away from an asset economy and toward what analysts call an outcome economy.
The outcome economy, that is the perfect way to phrase it. You aren't buying a machine. You are buying the guaranteed output of that machine.
Hmm.
And when you think about it, that completely changes the fundamental incentive structure of capitalism.
Let's use a simple example to illustrate that.
Okay? Say I buy a traditional washing machine from a big box store. The manufacturer makes money on the day I buy it. And cynically, they make money again if it breaks down in 3 years and I have to buy expensive replacement parts or just buy a whole new machine.
Exactly. Their incentive is built around the transaction and, often, planned obsolescence.
But if I subscribe to clean clothes as a service and the manufacturer retains ownership of the machine in my house, they only make money if that machine keeps working efficiently.
You've hit on the most critical paradigm shift of this entire trend. And this naturally transitions us into analyzing the profound implications for all the stakeholders involved.
Because if the entire global economy is shifting away from selling physical objects and toward selling guaranteed outcomes and continuous access, we have to look at the ripple effects.
What happens to businesses? What happens to consumer psychology? What happens to society as a whole? Let's start with the business perspective. Who really wins and who loses when a company servitizes?
Well, the pros for businesses seem almost overwhelmingly positive, almost too good to be true. As we discussed, you get deep, continuous, predictable customer relationships instead of one-off anonymous retail interactions.
You also get incredible data advantages. If you are monitoring a jet engine, an industrial robot, or even a consumer's software usage 24/7, you know exactly how to optimize your next product design.
And critically, you totally eliminate the secondary market. Think about how much money automakers lose when people buy used cars from third parties.
Right. With access models, you can't buy a used Netflix subscription at a garage sale. You can't inherit your father's sauce license. The company captures 100% of the value.
Those are the strategic victories, yes. However, the operational trade-offs for businesses are incredibly severe, aren't they? Particularly regarding what researchers at SAP call the cost to serve.
This is where companies really stumble. When a legacy manufacturing company decides to shift to a servitization model, they have to radically, sometimes painfully, change their internal financial operations.
Because instead of getting a massive, say, $10 million lump sum of cash on day one from selling a piece of heavy machinery cash they can use to pay their suppliers and reward their executives, they now have staggered incremental cash flows.
Spread out over the entire 10-year life cycle of the asset.
Right. You are promising to deliver profitability over a long horizon. The company has to front the massive upfront manufacturing cost of building the machine, but they might have to wait 3 or 4 years just to break even on the monthly subscription fees.
That creates a terrifying cash flow trough for a company in transition. It routinely bankrupts companies that don't plan for it.
So they have to completely overhaul their back end.
Transitioning requires entirely new, highly complex billing systems. It requires new revenue recognition software to satisfy tax authorities.
And perhaps most difficult of all, it requires a massive cultural shift within the sales team. Traditional sales teams are built around the adrenaline of closing massive enterprise deals and walking away to hunt the next whale.
But in an outcome economy, the initial sale is just the beginning of the relationship. The focus of the entire company must shift entirely toward customer success and retention.
Because if a customer churns, if they cancel their subscription early because the machine isn't delivering the outcome, the business might take a catastrophic loss on that physical asset.
Exactly. Okay, so that is the tightrope corporations have to walk. But what about the consumer experience?
We touched on the clear benefits earlier. The affordability of gaining access to premium goods, the incredible convenience, and the absolute freedom from the work of consumption.
If the fridge in my rented apartment breaks, it's the landlord's problem, not mine. If my cloud server goes down, it's Amazon's problem to fix it at 3 a.m. That is a huge psychological relief.
But there is a really dark side to this lack of ownership, isn't there? When we don't own things, our relationship to the physical world changes.
It changes fundamentally and often negatively. The Journal of Consumer Research published a deeply fascinating interpretive study by Barty and Eckhart, specifically analyzing the behavior and psychology of Zipcar consumers.
They were looking at how people treat objects they access but do not own.
Right. And they found that in market-mediated access, because the usage is temporary, anonymous, and entirely transactional, consumers experience a profound lack of identification with the object.
Contrast that with traditional ownership. When you save up and buy a car, it becomes a literal extension of your identity. You wash it on Sundays, you put bumper stickers on it, you care for it because its condition reflects on you.
But when you swipe a card and access a Zipcar for 2 hours, you don't care about the car's well-being at all.
In fact, the research has noted that this lack of identification frequently leads to negative reciprocity. People actively treat the shared cars poorly.
They leave trash in the cup holders, they drive them recklessly over potholes, they don't report minor damage, precisely because there is zero sense of psychological ownership or shared community.
The mindset is just, I paid my hourly fee, the condition of the car is the corporation's problem.
And how does the corporation respond to a tragedy of the commons like that? Because they can't just let their fleet be destroyed.
They respond by implementing what the researchers bluntly call a big brother model of governance.
Because the users refuse to police themselves or care for the asset, the platform is forced to strictly, algorithmically monitor the users.
The company tracks your driving speed, they track your GPS location, they monitor whether you return the car with less than a quarter tank of gas or if you were 5 minutes late.
And they punish you instantly with automated fines.
That is such a striking, almost dystopian paradox. The marketing of the access economy promises absolute freedom. You are free from the burden of the car loan, free from the mechanic's bills.
But in reality, you are totally subjugated to the rigid rules and the invisible surveillance of the corporate network. You trade the burden of maintenance for the burden of surveillance.
It is a trade-off of autonomies. But before we paint the access economy entirely as a surveillance state, there is one major stakeholder we haven't mentioned, and it might be the biggest winner of all in this transition: the environment.
Right. Because if we go back to the washing machine example, the sustainability angle is arguably the most compelling defense of the access economy.
It naturally promotes a circular economy.
It does. Under traditional 20th century ownership, the manufacturer fundamentally has a financial incentive to practice planned obsolescence. They want to make products with cheap plastic gears that break shortly after the warranty expires.
So you are forced to throw it in a landfill and buy a new one. The faster it breaks, the more money they make.
But under an outcome-based pass-S model, the manufacturer retains ownership of the asset forever. The math flips completely. Suddenly, they are highly financially incentivized to make products that last as long as humanly possible.
That use durable metal parts, that are incredibly easy to repair, and that can be seamlessly upgraded or recycled.
The sources highlight the electric vehicle industry as the prime example of this ecological alignment. An EV battery is massively resource-intensive to build.
When an EV battery degrades to, say, 70% capacity, it is no longer efficient for driving a car. Under a traditional ownership model, that massive battery might just be scrapped.
But if the manufacturer owns that battery as a service, they can easily pull it out of the car, refurbish it, and repurpose it for second life grid energy storage, where weight and perfect efficiency don't matter as much.
The access model literally aligns capitalism's relentless profit motive directly with ecological sustainability and resource conservation.
It's a beautiful theory. It really is.
But as we know, corporate utopias always come with a hidden price tag. And there is a growing palpable friction between the idealized frictionless version of the access economy that executives talk about at conferences and the messy reality that everyday consumers are facing on the ground.
We are starting to see massive pushback against this model. The pushback is real and it is structural.
Let's start with the most obvious consumer pain point: subscription fatigue. The Zora research proudly notes the explosive growth of recurring revenue models, but human beings only have so much cognitive bandwidth and so much disposable income.
Consumers are hitting a wall.
Look at the media landscape. 10 years ago, we all joyfully cut the massive cable TV cord because we wanted freedom and a la carte pricing. But now, the landscape is entirely splintered.
To watch the shows everyone is talking about, you need Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, Max, Apple TV, Amazon Prime.
We essentially traded one giant, predictable cable bill for a dozen confusing micro subscriptions that are constantly quietly raising their prices by $2 a month. People are exhausted.
You see it on social media every day. People are begging to just make a one-time purchase and be done with it.
Subscription fatigue is the psychological exhaustion of death by a thousand cuts.
Hmm.
But the deeper, far more structural criticism of the access economy revolves around the quiet loss of optionality and fundamental consumer rights.
In traditional economics, optionality has tangible, measurable value. When you own an asset outright, you possess the right to resell it when you are done with it to recoup some of your capital.
You can modify it to suit your custom needs. You can pledge it as collateral for a bank loan. Access models strip this economic power away from the consumer entirely.
You cannot build equity in a subscription. Your monthly payment vanishes into the corporate ether.
This brings up the massive controversies surrounding digital ownership, which really expose the illusion of control we have today.
It raises an incredibly important question.
And it's something I think about every time I click agree on a terms of service pop-up. If a company can push an invisible software update in the middle of the night that fundamentally alters or removes a feature you rely on,
Like an automaker deciding to disable your autonomous driving features unless you upgrade to a new payment tier.
or a massive media platform deciding to retroactively edit or completely delete a digital movie you thought you bought on their platform, do you really have any control over the products sitting in your own home?
The blunt legal answer is no, you do not. You have traded actual control for temporary convenience. When a consumer traditionally owns a product, they are, at least partially, free of the producer. The transaction is complete.
When they merely access a service, they remain perpetually dependent on the provider's goodwill, pricing power, and continued existence.
Critics of the access economy argue that this isn't a loosening of capitalist property relations, as some utopians claim, but rather a severe intensification of them.
Capital retains absolute ownership of the underlying assets and essentially rents access back to us, ensuring an ongoing, relentless extraction of wealth that a traditional one-time purchase would have permanently terminated.
It makes the individual consumer entirely structurally dependent on a corporate ecosystem.
Which is a perfect moment to take a step back and look at the broader historical context. Because critics say this dependency is new and terrifying. But wasn't the 20th century obsession with owning a suburban home and two cars actually the historical anomaly?
Weren't our ancestors basically just renting land from feudal lords and sharing communal tools?
Exactly. To truly understand if this shift is permanent, we have to zoom out and look at the history of property itself.
It is a vital perspective. We tend to think of universal personal ownership as the natural state of humanity, but it is a relatively modern construct. The prominent sociologist Daniel Bell referred to private property as the axial institution of capitalist society.
Historically, specifically in the post-WWII era, owning things, especially homes and land, but also vehicles and durable goods, provided what sociologists call ontological security.
Wait, ontological security, let's translate that. You mean like the fundamental psychological safety of knowing your absolute place in the world?
Literally the feeling of, I own this plot of dirt, I own the roof over my head, therefore I am safe from the chaos of the world.
Precisely. It wasn't just about financial equity. Owning a home anchored your identity. It provided a bulwark against the unpredictability of the outside world.
It gave people a sense of permanence, political independence, and social status. Widespread asset accumulation was the literal and psychological bedrock of the rising middle class.
And the sources note that historically, because ownership was so revered, renting was actually heavily stigmatized. Renters were viewed by society as feckless consumers.
If you rented your furniture or your home, it meant you lacked financial discipline and power. You were seen as someone who couldn't secure the American dream.
Exactly. Ownership was virtue, renting was a failure to launch.
But Jeremy Rifkin, in his incredibly prophetic book, The Age of Access, argued that mature capitalism is fundamentally shedding its material origins.
He posited that we are moving from exchanging physical goods in a geographic market to accessing segments of experience in a global network.
In this new era, the modern economy measures value in units of time, not in physical widgets. Ownership simply becomes too slow, too heavy, and too rigid an institution to adjust to the warp speed of a digital globalized culture.
Rifkin argues that in a world driven by software, everything becomes almost immediately outdated.
To have, to hold, to hoard, and to accumulate physical objects in an economy where rapid change is the only constant makes less and less sense.
Why own a computer server that will be obsolete in 2 years when you can just rent processing power from Amazon Web Services that upgrades itself continuously?
And this brings us to the profound, underlying philosophical debate about the future of our entire economic system. Because this transition is not morally neutral.
No, it is not.
So, taking all these sources together, what does this actually mean for us? Are we evolving into a hyper-efficient, shared resource utopia where no one wants for anything because everything from transportation to housing to entertainment is seamlessly available on demand, maximizing efficiency and saving the planet?
Or is this essentially digital neo-feudalism, where a few massive tech platforms and Wall Street financial institutions own all the actual underlying assets, and the rest of us just pay them daily rent simply to exist in their ecosystem?
As is often the case with massive structural shifts, the reality will likely encompass both extremes simultaneously. The access economy is undeniably, mathematically highly efficient for resource allocation.
It significantly reduces physical waste, it allows for rapid global technological innovation, and it provides incredible convenience to the end user.
But we cannot ignore the macroeconomic reality. It also systematically erodes the primary mechanism that middle-class households have historically used to build and pass down wealth.
The distributional consequences of this shift are immense. If institutional capital owns the real estate, owns the autonomous vehicles, and owns the software platforms, and individual consumers only rent access to them.
The traditional pathways to individual capital accumulation and generational wealth are severely restricted.
It's a chilling, but given the trajectory, an entirely plausible view of where we are heading.
And as we look to the immediate future, this trend doesn't seem to be slowing down. If anything, the technology is accelerating it.
The proliferation of the Internet of Things, coupled with the explosion of artificial intelligence, is only going to deepen this connectivity.
We are looking at a very near future where every physical object in your home, your smart fridge, your oven, your mirrors, your car, your clothing, could be tethered to a digital subscription powered by an AI that anticipates exactly when you need a service, orders it, and automatically bills you for the outcome.
The physical world will become entirely programmable and therefore entirely monetizable on a recurring microtransactional basis.
The historical boundary between a physical product you own and a digital service you access will disappear completely. We will live in a state of continuous ambient access.
We started this deep dive by asking if we are witnessing the end of ownership. But looking at all of this, maybe the better, harder question is about identity.
For centuries, humanity defined itself by the tangible things we owned. We were the land we held, the books proudly displayed on our shelves, the car we polished in the driveway. Those things told the world who we were.
If tomorrow you own absolutely nothing and just seamlessly access exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, directly from a corporate network.
How do you define what is uniquely yours? It's a massive question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it gives you something to think critically about the very next time you hover your finger over a button and hit subscribe.